Hey guys, this is essentially going to be a redo of the basic stats video, so if you've already seen that one, skip to the part on armor and magic resist and the part on armor and magic penetration, because those are the parts that are going to have changed from the original video. So basic stats in League of Legends, we've got our auto attacks here are a basic attack, and then we have abilities that we can throw as a champion. And attack damage is going to determine the amount of damage that we're doing on our basic attacks. And then certain abilities are also going to deal more damage if we have more attack damage. Attack damage is also known as physical damage. And then ability power, or AP, is magic damage, which is going to increase the amount of damage you do on certain abilities that do magic damage. So generally speaking, physical damage is supposed to represent in the game more like physical attacks. So, attacks that look like somebody physically attacking you are going to fall into that category and usually scale off of attack damage. And ability power is going to be more like magic. It's also called magic damage. It's going to be more like spells and things of that nature. So that's kind of a decent way to identify them, although it's not always accurate. Of course, for champion balance, sometimes they've had to make, spells do physical damage or physical attacks do magic damage, in order to make a champion synergize better with itself. But that's generally the way that the game is designed. Now, we also have health, which is how much damage we can take. And so, for example, this target dummy has 1,000 HP. So if I had 50 attack damage, when I go to basic attack this, I'm going to do 50 damage. And if I want to kill it, I'd have to hit it 20 times, because 20 times 50 would be 1,000. So health is essentially how much damage we can take. Now, in reality, your attacks aren't normally going to do what your attack damage says or what your abilities say the amount of damage that they're going to do, because of armor and magic resist. And what armor and magic resist do is reduce the amount of damage that you take from physical damage, or reduce the amount of magic damage that you take. But it's not so straightforward. So for example here, if we have 47 armor, it's not going to reduce 47 damage every time we get hit by a physical attack. It's not going to reduce 47% physical damage. Instead, it's going to translate into reducing 32% physical damage here. And so there's a chart that we can take a look at. And in this chart, we can kind of see the effect, right? So we can see that at 10 armor, we have 9% of physical or magic damage reduction. So they're the same for armor or magic resist. It's just that armor, works versus physical, and magic damage works versus magic. So if we have 10 armor, we're reducing physical damage by 9%. If we've got 100 armor, we're reducing it by 50%. If we've got 200 armor, we're reducing it by 66.66% or 67%. You get the idea. Now, it may look like there's diminishing returns here, and in fact, this is something that I thought was the case, but is not the case. So you may think, for example, that, well, I can see that when I go from 9% physical damage reduction and I buy another 10 armor, buying that 10 armor costs me the same as it's going to cost me to buy, to go from 70 to 80 armor. But when I go from 70 to 80 armor, I only get a 3% physical damage reduction increase. But when I go from 10 to 20, I get a 8% physical damage decrease. So maybe because I'm getting these like diminishing returns, I should kind of stop buying armor or magic resist at some point where the percentage that you're buying slows down. But this isn't the case, and I'll explain why with a little bit of math. What you really want to imagine is what would happen if you actually had 100% physical damage reduction. That would essentially mean that your effective HP is infinite, because you wouldn't take any damage from physical damage. Think about how much percentage physical damage reduction you would need to double your effective HP or to triple your effective HP. So imagine you have 1,000 HP. It's pretty easy to figure out double, right? If you reduce the damage they're dealing to you by 50%, which is at 100 armor, then you're going to effectively double your HP bar, because they're going to need to do 2 times the amount of damage to you in order to deal 1,000 damage. So they really need to deal 2,000 damage if you have 1,000 HP and 50% damage reduction. Now, where I think people get confused, myself included, was, so what do we need then to triple our HP bar? Well, it can't be 100% or double the 50%, because as we said, if it's 100%, then we're going to be reducing all physical damage, and we'd have an infinite amount of effective HP versus physical. So what it actually is 66%, because if you're at 66%, what that actually means is that every time they deal damage to you, 2/3 of that damage are being reduced, or they need to deal they're only doing 1/3 of as much damage, so they need to do 3 times as much damage in order to actually kill you. So if you have 1,000 HP and 200 armor or magic resist, they need to do 3 times the amount of damage in order to kill you. So actually, the way that this works is for every 100 armor or magic resist that you buy, you effectively gain an extra, however much health you have, you gain that extra health, as a multiple of your HP bar. So your effective HP, increases by an extra HP bar for every 100 magic resist or armor that you have. And that doesn't, get worse from going from 100 to 200 or from 200 to 300. So it is good to keep building armor and magic resist, even once you're getting into these smaller percentage increase numbers. And then we can take a look at this other chart here, which shows when it's gold efficient to buy health versus when it's gold efficient to buy armor and magic resist. And this curve changes depending on whether the team is 50% AD and 50% AP. So this is more closer to what you would see most of the time. Or if they're closer to 100% physical damage or 100% magic damage, then buying less armor and magic resist, buying more armor and magic resist if they're one type, being able to focus on buying a bunch of armor versus an all AD team, or a bunch of magic resist versus an all MR team, becomes better, slightly more efficient than buying more health. And so we can see from this chart that essentially what you want to be doing is you want to buy items that are good for the other reasons why the items are good. They're a strong item, it's got a good active or a good passive, which can be as important or more important sometimes than the stats that it's giving you, but you want to generally be within the efficient range. So if you have 2 items that are pretty similar in power level, pretty similar actives and passives, or like what the benefit is from those actives or passives, but one way over indexes you on armor, and the other one doesn't and keeps you kind of in line with what you're looking for, because maybe the item you bought before was a heavy armor item, and now you need, kind of an MR item. Or maybe the item you bought before gave you a lot of armor and magic resist, but not enough health, according to this chart. If you have 2 items that are pretty similar to each other, but one puts you more in line with this chart, it can be better to kind of try to stay within a normal range, only slightly over indexed on either health or armor or magic resist, but kind of staying near the curve while getting items that are really good for you, in the active or passive anyways. So we can see that if we were following this, we would have been fine, even if we had made this, had this misunderstanding or this misconception about diminishing returns. But it is important to note that armor and magic resist actually don't fall off, don't have diminishing returns. It's just that the numbers get smaller because you're approaching but never reaching 100% physical or magic damage reduction. You're approaching that limit, but you're never getting there. So that's how you should be building health versus armor and magic resist and what those do. And then we have attack speed. Now, attack speed, just like armor and magic resist, synergize with your health to give you more effective health. Attack damage and attack speed can synergize really well because you're trying to do the most damage per second that you can do, if you're a damage dealer. And so a lot of times you're going to want to prioritize the mix between attack damage and attack speed that gives you the most damage essentially. And so let's take a look at how that would work. So you would expect a chart like this that shows you, when it's efficient to buy more AD or when it's efficient to buy more attack speed. But the problem is that every champion deals with attack speed in a different way. And so unfortunately, because of that, there would have to be a different efficiency chart for every single champion. So it might be easier if you really want to know the specifics or try to follow, you're playing an auto attack reliant champion, you want to have an appropriate mix between attack speed and AD. It might be helpful to, not make the whole chart, but just make a couple of points for yourself as a reference. Like, here's what happens at 50 AD. Here's how much attack speed it's sufficient to have. Here's how much attack speed it's sufficient to have at 100 AD, at 150, at 200. Those are just a couple of points. Doing a little bit of math on like 4 points is going to give you a really good idea of about where you should be with your items, so that you can do the same thing with attack speed and attack damage on an auto attack reliant champion that we would on a tank between health and resistances. So each champion has a base attack speed, which is how many attacks per second they can do. And they have different base attack speeds. And then they also have an attack speed ratio. So when you go to buy attack speed will say it gives you 12% attack speed for a dagger, let's say. But it doesn't give, what does 12% attack speed really mean? Because what we want to know is how many attacks per second is it giving us? Because that's what we're actually adding onto our base, is how many attacks per second. And that's why there are all these different charts for each champion's attack speed versus AD. Because the issue is that if you buy attack speed on one champion, you're not going to get the same amount of attacks per second as you would on another champion. So we can see, for example, some champions like Akshan, LeBlanc, Senna don't get very much attack speed, from buying attack speed. But other champions like Bel'Veth, Nocturne, Volibear get a lot more attacks per second from buying attack speed. So these champions are more incentivized to potentially buy attack speed if it's good for their playstyle. Now we've also got this weird stat called bonus attack speed at level 1. And so the way that this works is you have your base attack speed, and then attack speed that you gain per level or by purchasing is considered bonus attack speed. That means attack speed that wasn't part of your base. This is giving you some extra attack speed at level 1 that doesn't count as your base attack speed, but it actually is included in this base attack speed number, because this is essentially showing your attack speed at level 1. So from what I've heard, this bonus attack speed that you get at level 1 is included in this base number. This is not something that goes away after level 1, because it says at level 1, so that can confuse people. This isn't something that goes away once you get to level 2. It's just that some champions might start with, let's say, a base of like 0.5 attacks per second, and no bonus attack speed at level 1. A lot of champions don't have bonus attack speed at level 1. But some champions might have 0.5 attack speed, but also start out with a bonus of 10% attack speed at level 1. So that's going to take that 10%, it's going to multiply it by their attack speed ratio. It's, I think, included in this number here, but if you looked at it in game, it would be considered bonus. There are some reasons why it matters that it's bonus instead of base. Certain champions care about whether certain champions and items and runes can care about whether your attack speed is base or not. Like a good example would be that Kai'Sa needs 100% bonus attack speed in order to evolve her E. Although Kai'Sa actually doesn't get any bonus attack speed at level 1, so it doesn't matter for her. And I can't think of other examples right now. Let me know if you can think of any. And then you get a growth coefficient. So this is how much attack speed you're gaining per level. This is the percentage that you would gain at level 18, having gotten all of those bonuses. And then this is the actual value in terms of attacks per second that you're getting. And then this is the additional attack speed that you would need to get not including from leveling up, because it assumes you're level 18. So this is the amount of attack speed you would need to get from items and runes to hit the attack speed cap. The attack speed cap is that the game only allows you to attack at a maximum speed of 2.5 auto attacks per second. There was a rune called Lethal Tempo that used to allow you to break the attack speed cap, but currently nothing like that exists in the game. And so, that's attack speed. So getting back into the game here, like I said, that you would want a mix between attack damage and attack speed if you're relying on basic attacking a lot, like if you're an AD carry, because for most AD carries, if you're trying to do the most DPS with your auto attacks as possible. Now, it is true that some abilities do extra damage based on your attack damage. So if you were trying to do a mix of both, maybe you were trying to, you're a champion that does a lot of physical damage from your abilities as well, like an AD carry that's more of a caster or has damaging spells that scale on AD. Maybe it's fine to be a little bit more off of that curve. So you're sacrificing DPS in your auto attacks in order to gain damage in your abilities. That could be fine. But if you're a purely attack speed, auto attack reliant champion, you're going to want to have a balance between attack speed and attack damage, because if you have 1000 AD but you attack 0 times a second, it's not going to do anything. But if you've got 1000% attack speed, or you're at the attack speed cap, but you have 2 AD, that's not going to do much for you either. So there's a middle point where going and purchasing extra AD is going to actually decrease your DPS if you needed more attack speed, and going and purchasing more attack speed, when you already have a lot of attack speed and need some damage on your hits is going to hurt as well. So you want to find the balance there, just like between health and armor and magic resist. Now, similarly to attack speed, ability haste is going to speed up our cooldowns on our abilities. So we have to wait for our ability to come up, and ability haste is going to speed that up. So a lot of champions that are, building a lot of ability power and trying to maximize their DPS, essentially ability haste could be thought of as like the attack speed of caster champions that deal damage with their abilities. Now, it doesn't have to be AP, right? You could also be an AD champion that doesn't rely on your basic attacks very much and does most of your damage through casting your abilities. That champion is going to over-index on attack damage, under-index on attack speed, and they're going to get some ability haste, because ability haste plus their AD is going to do the same thing on an AD scaling or physical damage scaling ability as ability power and ability haste would, which is, again, you have 1000 ability power, but your cooldowns are super long. You're going to do less damage than if you just put a little bit of that gold into having 900 ability power, but like 20 or 30 ability haste. Ability haste works a little bit weird. It used to be that cooldown reduction just told you what percentage you were going to get, but they made it a little bit complicated. So let's take a look at how ability haste actually works. So ability haste has this equation that the cooldown reduction that you gain equals the haste that you have divided by the haste plus 100, and then times 100 to get a percentage. So I've given some examples here. So we've got 20 ability haste, and it's divided by 120 because we take 100 plus the 20 haste that we have. So 20 divided by 120 gives us 16.66% cooldown reduction when we buy our 20 haste. Now, buying an additional 20 haste does not give us 16.66 extra cooldown reduction. Instead, we only go up to this 28% cooldown reduction. So we can see here that instead of going to like 32, 33, 34, depending on this, we're only going up to 28. And then same thing here, I'm going to multiply this by 100 so it's easier to see. We're moving from, so we gained 16 here for our first 20, we gained 12 here, and then we only gained like 9 or something like that here. So we gained about 9 here. So you can see that there are diminishing returns on buying more and more ability haste. And so it is good to get a certain amount of ability haste, and then it starts to fall off if you're over indexing on ability haste instead of on other aspects. Like if you're a tank and you're building ability haste just to have some cooldown reduction, be able to use your abilities more, right? Then if you're buying too much ability haste, not buying enough of your tank stats, that's not going to be good for you. If you're a physical damage caster champion that relies on doing damage with your abilities, but you're over indexing on ability haste, that's going to hurt you as opposed to buying more physical damage. If you're a magic damage dealer who's buying a mix of ability haste and AP, same thing. If you over index on ability haste, that's going to hurt you as opposed to getting the appropriate mix of ability power. So then we have another category that can kind of throw kind of a cog in our wheels here, which is crit strike chance. So critical strike chance or crit chance makes it so that when we auto attack, if we crit, we deal 75% increased damage. So if I went to auto attack somebody and I had 100 AD and it was supposed to do 100 damage, if I crit, then it would do 175 percent of that, or 175 damage. So when you buy crit items now, they give you 25% crit each, but you can imagine that that introduces obviously like kind of an RNG element into the game, where especially when you have a low amount of crit, when you're on your first item and you're at 25% crit, when you're on your second item and you're at 50% crit, there's just a chance that your DPS ends up being much lower than you would have hoped. Or your DPS in some cases is going to end up much higher than you would expect. And so that creates kind of an inconsistency. But obviously, like, this is an interesting stat, and you can increase the this from 75% to more by buying an item like Infinity Edge, which gives you even more damage when you do crit. More percentage damage when you do crit. So obviously now, if you're an auto attack reliant champion, you might want to buy attack damage and attack speed and crit. And then there's another thing that's worth mentioning, and I just made a video on hit damage versus crit strike. But if we look at like Infinity Edge, this is going to give you an extra 40% critical strike damage. So if you buy Infinity Edge when you're building crit, then instead of doing 75%, now we're adding 40% to that. So that would be 115%, I believe. So 115% if I had 100 damage. Now I'd do 215 damage if I crit. That's kind of the benefit of going Infinity Edge. But there are also on-hit items, like here's one, right, in Wit's End, which gives you attacks apply 40 magic damage on hit. On hit means like when you go to auto attack. So, and there are certain abilities that are so similar to auto attacks that they apply on hit as well. But the point is that you kind of have a choice between going attack damage, attack speed, and on hit, or attack damage, attack speed, and crit. On hit is going to be more consistent. It's going to give you, a certain amount of kind of consistent DPS, but crit is going to probably outpace it or do more if you're actually managing to crit a certain amount, which is going to happen more as you get 3 items, 4 items, and you're at 75% or 100% crit. And so my opinion, right, is that essentially crit outscales on hit. And so depending on what you're looking to do, right, you have to build a mix between attack damage, attack speed, and critical strike chance or on hit. Now, movement speed is pretty straightforward. This is just the speed at which our character is going to be able to move. But definitely an important thing to note about movement speed is that movement speed is kind of binary. You're either faster than somebody or you're not. And so it can be really good, and you see a lot of players building boots first, because if you go back and you get, your tier 1 boots when they didn't buy them, then you're faster than them for a very small amount of gold. And so that means you're always going to be able to run away from them. You're always going to be able to outchase them and things like that, because you have more movement speed on them. And then if you get your tier 2 boots first, that is also going to give you a movement speed advantage that's going to allow you to always run away from them or outpace them. And that can be a huge advantage, because even though it may not give you a ton of movement speed, having more movement speed, right? Because it's kind of binary. Having more movement speed or having less movement speed can be a really big deal. And so, having more is good. It says our practice tool game is going to end in 5 minutes. So if we hit, this key here, we can actually see there's some extended stats. Obviously, our abilities are going to cost a certain amount of mana. So mana is, like it says 45 mana here. So abilities are going to cost mana or energy, or some champions don't have mana at all, and so their abilities are free. Some champions, even their abilities cost health, but mana on most champions is going to be, the amount that your abilities cost. And so similar to how we were talking about, if you're an ability reliant champion, if you don't have any mana and you're spamming your abilities, or you have a lot of ability haste, and so your abilities are on a really short cooldown and you're spamming them out, but you don't have enough mana, then you're just going to run out of mana, and then what's the point? You're going to have to go back anyways. So obviously mana would be something that you would have to synergize or put into a build with ability haste and ability power as well. And luckily most of these items provide for, giving you a good mix of a couple of these stats anyways. So then here we have health and resource regen, which is usually mana regen, right? But it can be like energy and things like that. And so what it's telling us here is that every 5 seconds we regen 9 HP if we're missing HP, and every 5 seconds we regen 7 mana or energy, if we're missing mana or energy. Now here we have this number, which is showing right here when I hover over my health or when I hover over my mana, is showing me how much I get per second instead of per 5 seconds. So you can see every second I get 1.7 health regen and I get 1.4 mana regen. Pretty straightforward. Some items or champions' abilities are going to give you extra healing and shielding power, which is fairly straightforward. It's going to give you extra healing or shielding on abilities that do that. And now we have lethality and armor penetration and magic penetration, percentage magic penetration. So what's important to note is that starting in this season, in season 14, lethality was changed so that it is just back to being flat armor penetration. So if going back to that armor chart and thinking about that, if you have 10 armor penetration or 10 lethality, that's going to represent 10 armor penetration. It's just going to ignore 10 of their armor. This is important to note because, if you have this misconception that there's diminishing returns from having more and more armor, then you would also think that there's kind of exponential returns for having more and more lethality or magic penetration. Because if you can reduce them from 40 armor to 30 armor, or from 40 magic penetrate, or from 40 magic resist to 30 magic resist, that would give you a bigger, percent increase in damage that you're dealing to them. But actually, the effective HP that they have is being decreased by the same amount, whether they go from 40 to 30 or whether they go from 100 to 90. So flat armor penetration, which is called lethality, or flat magic penetration. Lethality and flat magic penetration are really going to do the same thing, which is they're just going to ignore that flat amount. It's going to be, it's going to have the same effect no matter how much armor or magic resist the person has. It's going to decrease their effective HP by the exact same amount. Now, of course, if they have more, if you have 30% armor penetration or 30% magic penetration, you're going to benefit more from that than you are going to against a champion that has 200 armor or magic resist. It's going to reduce more than the flat will, and so that's obviously going to be better against those champions, because if it's decreasing a percentage and they have a huge total amount, you're going to get more flat armor penetration or flat magic penetration out of your percentage-based item. The percentage-based applies first. So if you have 30%, someone has 100, let's say you have 30% and you have 10 flat, and somebody has 100 armor or magic resist, it's going to ignore 30% of their armor or magic resist, so it's going to drop them from 100 down to 70. Then your 10 flat is going to apply, so that now it's dropping them from 70 to 60, which is better than if flat were to apply first. So, you kind of get the idea there with those. Lifesteal returns a portion of the damage that you deal with attacks as health. Uh-oh. Do you think if we sit here, we can still see the stats? It looks like we can. We'll see if it kicks me out. Oh, it kicked me out. Well, that's Riot's client for you. Let me shoot up a game really quickly here again. I tried my best to go fast, but it did not work. So where were we? We were on Lifesteal. So lifesteal is interesting. Basically, the way that lifesteal works is it's going to give you, if you have 10% lifesteal, when you go to, here, let me pull it up. When you go to auto attack, right, it's going to return a portion of that auto attack to you as health. So let's say I'm missing a little bit of HP, and I have 10% lifesteal. If I go and do 100 damage to somebody, then I'm going to, gain 10 health back. It's important to note that this is after armor and magic resistance. So so it's actually the amount that you're dealing, not the amount that, your AD is, or the amount that your ability says it is. Of course, lifesteal doesn't work on your abilities, but you get the idea. So, if you've got 10%, you got 100 AD. If they have resistances, you're not actually going to heal that whole thing back. So if they had like 50% resistances, you have 100 AD, you do 50 damage to them, you're actually only going to gain that 5 health back. But if you're if you've got 100 AD and they've got 0 resistances, right, and then you're actually doing that 100 damage, if you've done 100 damage to somebody with your basic attacks, then it's going to give you that 10 health back. And so this is a great way, right, for champions that are maybe shorter range, who are relying on their attack damage and their attack speed. Attack reliant champions, the kind that we talked about, that might go AD and attack speed and crit, or AD and attack speed and on hit. Especially if they're short range and they're actually getting hit or getting into the thick of things, or if they're a melee champion looking to rely on their auto attacks like that, getting lifesteal can be really, really valuable, because it's going to help you stay alive and be tanky at the same time. And so you're going to have certain synergy between these stats as well, because if you're able to stay alive for longer, then you're going to be able to use your attack damage and your attack speed more. Now, another really interesting thing to note about lifesteal is that on-hit effects, even if they deal magic damage, are going to apply lifesteal. And so that's a little bit confusing, because when we look at an item like Wit's End that's doing 40 magic damage, one of the other benefits to on-hit items versus crit items is that on-hit items sometimes do, actually quite a lot, magic damage on hit instead of physical damage, which kind of helps balance your damage out, so that it's harder to itemize against you, because you're doing a mix of physical and magic damage. And so it kind of makes it harder to itemize against you for that reason. Also, champions tend to have less magic resist than they do armor. And so that's really important. So even though, an item like Wit's End does magic damage on hit, because it returns a portion of the damage you deal with attacks as health, it doesn't have to be physical damage with attacks. It's just any damage that you deal with attacks. So on hit that's either built into a champion, like a Kaisa passive or a Varus passive, like his passive on his W that gives on hit, or like Vayne W passive, or on hit items like Wit's End, even though those things are sometimes magic damage, well, not all those things were magic damage, but even if it's magic damage, as long as you're dealing it with your attacks, you will be able to lifesteal off of it. So that's, very important to know. Now, Omnivamp returns a portion of all of the damage that you deal. So this could be, true damage, magic damage, physical damage, from auto attacks or from abilities. Just all the damage that you deal, you get back as some health. But it is reduced to 20% effectiveness when dealing damage to minions or monsters. So another thing that's important to keep in mind about that is if you've got, 10, 20% lifesteal, you're going to be able to heal off of minions and stuff like that when you're farming in between fighting or trading. Whereas with Omnivamp, you're only going to heal for 20% of what you normally would when you're dealing that damage to minions or monsters. So, similar concept with Omnivamp here. It's just going to apply to everything. And then range, this is pretty straightforward. This is just how far away your champion can attack from. Really important to note, though, because I think a lot of people miss this, is when you go to auto attack, right, you want to be auto attacking on the edge of your range, like right when you get into range. So if you click like past them or on top of them, a lot of times what's going to happen is when you click on top of them or when you click past them, you can kind of see here. Let's take a look here. I'm just barely clipping like the foot of this with this. Whereas I'm a little bit further away here. You see this? So I hope you can see this, but basically when you go to auto attack, if you click past them, and then we look at where I actually end up attacking them, you can see that I'm clipping this foot. Whereas if I attack in front of them, that's clipping the foot a little bit there too. Interesting. Well, I didn't do a good job of explaining it, but the point is that a lot of times, especially versus a target that's moving into you as well, rather than a target dummy, if they move a little bit forward and you move a little bit forward and you right click on them or you attack move past them or something like that, you're not going to auto attack until after you've gotten within each other's range. Whereas if you're clicking in front, it can be much better. I hope that makes sense. I'll have to explain that better in a different one. So we've got attack range there, and then we've got tenacity, which is going to reduce the duration of crowd control debuff. So crowd control kind of prevents you from doing something, makes you move slower, or prevents you from moving entirely. But airborne or suppression effects, so airborne is like when you get knocked up in the air, and like knockups and stuff like that. And suppression is, it's kind of like it just prevents you from doing everything. But the way that it's different from a stun is usually the champion is attached to you while they're doing it. They're kind of sucking from you like a Malzahar ult or a Skarner ult. And these are usually also very key abilities that are very big ultimate abilities and stuff like that, or that are suppressions. And so usually when you're being suppressed, right, it's such a key ability that they don't want it reduced. And so tenacity is something that you can buy as well to reduce the duration. And this is really important, right? It reduces the duration of crowd control. So if you have 20% tenacity and you were getting stunned for 1 second, now you're going to get unstunned 1/5 of a second sooner. Now that sounds like it doesn't make a big difference, but it can be effective because a lot of times they'll try to stack CC on top of you. So they'll wait for that CC to wear out. And then right as it's about to wear out, they'll hit you with another CC so that you're really stuck and unable to move. But if you have tenacity, you're able to disrupt their expected pattern of when they should chain CC onto you. So especially in high relos where people are doing a good job of chain CCing people, if you have some tenacity, it's going to allow you to break out of that cycle because their expected timing might be off, and it's going to allow you to get your flash off, get a dash off, or even just move out of the way. And then, of course, they're going to throw damaging abilities at you if you get CC'd. So if you're able to move a little bit earlier, sometimes, that damaging ability is going to come out a little bit late, and it's going to allow you to get out of that and be able to dodge that ability. So that's kind of what Tenacity does for you. It's really important to note that, this is reducing the duration of crowd control, because I wanted to show there's an item in the game, Boots of Swiftness, which gives you 25% slow resistance. And it's kind of confusing because, so what is the difference between slow resistance and tenacity? If you get slowed and you have 20% tenacity, it's going to reduce the duration of the slow by 20%. So if you're slowed for a second, the last fifth of that second, you're not going to be slowed anymore if you have that 20% tenacity. With slow resistance, if you have, Swiftness boots and you've got that 25% slow resistance, then there's two ways that this could work, right? It could just reduce the slow by a flat 25%, or it could work multiplicatively. So it could either be like additive or subtractive, or it could be multiplicative. And it's multiplicative, meaning that if you get hit by, like, let's say a 25% slow, it's not just going to not slow you. Instead, if you get hit by a 20% slow, it's going to reduce 25% of that slow's strength. And so it's going to reduce it by, 25% of 20 would be 5%. And so it's going to reduce it by 5%. So now you're getting slowed by 15% instead of getting slowed by 20%. So that's important to keep in mind how that works. So that's only reducing the slow by 5% and not doing anything to the duration. So that's important to understand. I think it's also important to know when you're looking at these, there's some indicators here. So you can see, for example, that most of these stats are gray, but then for some reason my movement speed and my ability haste are kind of highlighted in this yellowish color or golden color or whatever you want to call it. And the reason for that is because it's showing that I actually have some bonus movement speed and some bonus ability haste. In this case, coming from my runes, you can see that I have 2% movement speed and I have 8 ability haste, which is giving me these things. If I go into the shop, right, and I buy like a longsword or something like that, which gives me AD, it's going to show, this in yellow here as well. So that's kind of an interesting little thing to be able to see, what you have bought extra of and what you don't have extra of. And it's important to note, I think, what stats here you start the game with and which stats you like gain per level, and which stats you only gain by like buying or from runes. And so we can take a look at a champion here like Braum, for example, and get an idea, just to double check that we're right about all of these things. So let's see, where's his attack damage? So here he has 55 starting attack damage, moving to 109.4. So this means that yes, you start with attack damage, and yes, you gain attack damage per level. Now for ability power, you can see that I don't have any ability power. So I don't know, is it even going to mention it here? Probably not. So it's maybe it only mentions the ones that that actually do. So as far as I know, you don't start the game with ability power on any champion. Maybe some have some passive that give them something, but as far as I know, no starting ability power. You do not gain ability power per level. Interestingly enough, right, though, you do gain AD per level. So that's kind of an interesting difference between ability power champions and attack damage champions, that AD champions like an AD carry or something like that are going to get stronger by gaining extra attack damage per level, whereas the mage champions that are relying on AP, their basic attacks will get a little bit stronger, but they're not really relying on those, other than to like last hit minions and stuff like that. So they're not getting any ability power per level for free. Armor and magic resist are two that both give you a starting value and then you gain extra per level. Same thing with attack speed. We covered that you get attack speed per level. Ability haste, you do not start the game with any ability haste. I just have some because, like I said, I have some in my runes. But you don't start the game with any given ability haste, and you don't gain any per level. You don't start the game with any critical strike chance, and you don't gain any per level. And movement speed, you start with a base movement speed, but you do not gain movement speed per level. Let's just double check that. Yeah, you see there's no, it doesn't go to another number. You just have a base movement speed. Of course, you're going to get some from buying it and stuff like that. And then here we have health regen and mana regen. You start with a base amount and you get a bonus amount per level. Healing and shielding power, you don't gain any healing and shielding power at the start of the game, and you would only get it if you buy it. You don't gain any per level. Lethality and armor penetration, you don't start with any, don't gain any per level. Same thing with magic pen. Same thing with lifesteal. You don't start with any, you don't gain any. Same thing with Omnivamp. You don't start with any Omnivamp, you don't gain any Omnivamp. And attack range, I believe your attack range should just stay the same. So let me just double check this one too. Yeah, it just says 125. So there are items that can increase your attack range, which is why it shows this potential bonus here. And there are certain champions like Tristana, who's got a passive that increases her attack range per level. But for most regular champions, you just have an attack range and it stays the same. And then Tenacity, you don't start with any and you don't gain any per level. So that's the basic stats that kind of run the game. Again, everything from turrets having AD and armor and magic resist and a certain attack speed, to inhibitors in your Nexus having a certain amount of HP, or jungle camps, having certain stats as well, like AD and armor and magic resist, and things like that, and movement speed and all this stuff. Essentially, all of these stats are going to dictate everything in the game, even down to like a ward has a certain amount of HP. You can see it has 3 hit points, which is why it dies in 3 attacks, or a plant which has 1 hit point, which is why it dies in 1. Interesting that the blast cone has the maximum attack speed allowed in the game, but maybe that's a little Easter egg for no reason. So it's really important to understand these basic stats because some of them are complicated and confusing. Many of them have changed, and so even for a veteran player like myself, it can be difficult to remember exactly how they work, and they dictate the way that everything in the game works. So I hope that you guys found that helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and good luck in solo queue, and have a wonderful day.